Leadership isn't confined to boardrooms and business suits. Some of the most influential leaders are those who shape the minds and characters of the next generation. Tex Tourais is an inspiring educator who teaches 11th and 12th grade English at Mary Institute and Country Day School in St. Louis, Missouri. With a deep commitment to his students and a passion for guiding them beyond academics, Tex serves as a faculty advisor to the school newspaper and the Honor Council, heads the Committee on Grants and Scholarships, and leads the 11th grade English curriculum. Beyond the classroom, he coaches middle school track and upper school tennis, instilling values of perseverance, teamwork, and dedication in young students and student athletes alike. Tex Tourais, welcome to INFAWORK Insights. We're the leadership podcast where we interview leaders and find out their background, their inspirations, their motivations, their practices. And I have been interviewing mostly business leaders, some thought leaders, and this really kind of started to, as I'm building, my list of guests, I started asking myself about leaders, and I don't want to just have the same type of leader, just people leading businesses. And then we got together a few weeks ago, we started talking, and it just kind of hit me like, what more important leaders do we have in our society than the people that teach our children? And so, I want to have educators, and I always enjoy talking to you. And it only takes us about 5 minutes before we start digging in real deep. So I figured, why don't we put a camera on us so we can continue one of our sessions without the beer this time. So welcome, and thank you for doing that.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I guess maybe I'll just kick it off. Like, when you think about your position in your job, and we can get beyond the job as well at some point, do you consider yourself a leader?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
And I guess there's a couple. There's the students, and I'm the leader there quite clearly. And then, I am the team 11 English grade or the 11th grade English lead teacher. So, among colleagues and things like that, you try to be a leader. But maybe my definition of leadership is a little more expansive because I am just a teacher, right? I'm an English teacher. That's what I was 21 years ago. That's what I am today. And that's probably what I'll retire as. I don't have aspirations really of being department chair or dean or upper school head. So, I'm just in my function, trying to do my function to the best of my abilities. And but I do run meetings within that capacity. That's what a teacher is I have a group of kids who come in, and it's a 90-minute meeting that I'm running. And if I've got a 90-minute meeting and I've got 18 students in that room, then the way I look at that is that's 18 times 90. So that's 27 hours. And if that meeting goes well, then that's 27 well-used hours. And if it doesn't, if I botch it in some way, shape, or form, then that's 27 hours wasted. So I think, I guess what I'm trying to say is I have a deep and abiding respect for other people's time. And I try, when I'm in a position where I'm running a meeting or where I'm in the lead, then I try to manage things in order to respect that time and to do the things that are necessary to them. And maybe that's all that it takes. I don't know. Is that answer satisfying to you?
All of your answers are satisfying to me. There's no right answer. It's just different perspectives, and yours is a very valuable one, and it has been in my life since we met. Kind of keeping on that topic of leadership, and we'll keep on that topic throughout the podcast, but specifically to you and what you just said and how you define leadership. Thinking back to maybe your early days, not in your career, but as you were kind of coming to the conclusion that this is what you wanted to do for your career. Did leadership play a role in that decision, or was it more of kind of the love of literature, the love of books, the idea of teaching? Where did leadership kind of come into that decision-making process?
Even when I was a little kid, I think I wanted to be a teacher. I liked school. I liked my teachers. I respected a lot of them. Obviously, if I didn't respect a teacher, that didn't go well. But the good teachers, I thought they were somebody that I wanted to emulate. So then I got a degree, and I got a business degree in marketing, but I also got an English degree, and I was doing some marketing work when I came right out of college. And, I was doing like e-marketing. So if you got an email from Omaha Steaks or Macy's by Mail or Heller Whirly Gigs between 2000 and 2002, it came through me.
That was you.
I was doing well. I had some interns under me and things like that, but I didn't feel like a leader. Certainly, I didn't feel. I didn't feel like I was doing anything of value. I was, connecting, a customer to Macy's a little bit better through email, even if you get that done well, or even if you satisfy that job component. Yeah, I think I was suffering from that lack of that human connection piece of having a function where I felt like my impact on the people around me actually mattered, where my impact on clients actually mattered. And so that's where I decided to shift into teaching and went into I took an interview. I taught a 45-minute class when I first got my first job. It was, I had 45 minutes of teaching experience and it was the interview. But I think it was part of that desire to, I did feel like I had some skills. I felt like I wasn't break the bank smart, but I was too smart to be sitting on the sidelines, and that I had something to offer. And so that's what precipitated the shift. Um, and I think it was that desire to maybe be a better leader, and the hope that the attempt to be a better leader would make me a better person. And I do think ultimately that happened. I think that I'm a very different person now, 21 years later, after devoting so much time and effort to being a better lead when it comes to students or whoever else, or people who are now I'm mentoring as they enter the profession.
I hope that some of the people that are listening or watching this podcast, one of our kind of core focuses is helping people that have a dream, an entrepreneurial dream, giving them the tools to be able to take that step, and helping them succeed with all the different features that we have in InfoWork that make it easy for them to operate their business. But I think that what you just said in terms of your early job and with email, and it really, even like when we met, I was CEO of this large company, but I wasn't fulfilled. And it was the same thing. It was just like what I was doing did not connect to what I thought I should be doing. The job and the soul were kind of out of alignment. And I think that a lot of people maybe put money ahead of that. And I guess I just want to make sure people know that it doesn't matter how much money you make. If you're not doing something that you feel like you were put on this earth to do, then that happiness is going to be elusive and fulfillment is going to be elusive. I'm wondering if maybe that was part of the decision that kind of drove you to take a look at this and sort of change the page.
Yeah, and to root it back in the business world a little bit, when you are spending your time building a class, whether it's 11th grade English, American Lit or something like that, when that's your end product, or your workflow is, all right, I'm going to create this class that then connects together. The students come in and then they experience that class, and you're getting real second to second, minute to minute feedback on how that's going, on the end result of your work. The end user is in the room. Now, obviously, the parents are there too, kind of hovering in the background. And you're not going to, different students have different affects. And so, you're not going to hear about some of your greatest successes right in the moment. There will be some students where some moment hits them in a way that really impacts them. They're going to remember for the rest of your life. And you might not find that out for 2-3 years until you get a letter or an email with that student finally telling you how important you were to them. Even for just the smaller, just you construct this entire architecture for a lesson of 90 minutes that all fits together. But then the most important thing that you do that day is there's some kid with like a little rain cloud over their head, and you slip them a note that says, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
And in that moment, that moment is wildly significant to those students. And so you never know when that's going to happen, but you are getting that. I think, again, part of it is, whatever it is you produce, whatever you use your time in order to create, are you getting feedback on how that's going? Because I do think that that's important, and it's not an arrogance thing in my mind. It's just, we are all just social creatures. We're constantly minute to minute trying to check with, okay, how did this comment go over, or did this joke land, or am I wearing the right thing, or do I smell? And when you're talking about your work life, that is 8, 10, 12 hours a day, if you're not getting anything back on how you're doing, except for maybe a spreadsheet, or maybe some superior, some boss whose feedback you may or may not respect, if you have no sense of how the end user is actually either appreciating or not appreciating the time and effort you're putting in, for me at least, that's really difficult. Now, I'm on the very extreme of that. to where, I've dropped myself into an environment where I can see the 18 faces sitting right there. And that's my daily experience. And I have that 3-4 times a day, where it's just meeting after meeting, essentially. And if I'm doing something wrong, if a class doesn't go well, I'll be honest with you, today's classes, I had a class that did not go well the first time. It did not meet my expectations of what that class should be in terms of what was learned and in terms of the excitement of learning. And then I made some changes and the second class was better, but still not happy about it. It's not a good Monday for me. I want it to be better. I want them to be entertained and enlightened. And I don't know that it was the worst class that they came to today. I don't know that they're even going to remember it as being a particularly bad class. I don't think that that's the case. But I know what I'm capable of. I know what that class should be. And I know I did not meet that. And that's good. That's good for me to know. And it gives me something to try and improve upon tomorrow. And
But where does the, obviously I could sell cigarettes to a lot of people and that makes them happy. I can lower the price and they could, be even happier. And in one sense there, I'm getting a feedback that, what I'm doing is making my customer happy. But there's also something beyond that. And I think that maybe it's inherent in teaching is that, you're kind of like, you're building skills, you're making these human beings better. So maybe there's a noble, that the position itself is noble. And maybe there's a prerequisite to that rather than, I'm trying to kind of put it into a construct to say there are some jobs where inherently that feedback is enough. But then there's some that even if you get that feedback, what you're doing, if you're a drug dealer and your customer is giving you a feedback of like, man, that's a really good hit, there's got to be something else. And maybe it's a personal thing too. It's like you think this is noble pursuit. You're going to dedicate your life to this because this is what you believe. And then on top of that, you've got to make sure that I'm good at this. And that's where that feedback loop comes in.
Yeah. And I think with one of the impetus for that move or one of the good results of the move I made from marketing into teaching is it taught me very early on not to allow other people to define success for me. So I think, ultimately I just read a book by Andy Clark called The Experience Machine, which I think is excellent and speaks about the brain as a predictive brain, right? What we try to do, our main operation, our main mental process is to predict the future and then move in a way that encourages success and mitigates failure. And so if we understand that, if what I'm doing is I'm just trying to look ahead and predict, whether it's just like, all right, I want that pen in my hand, and then I'm trying to think about what's the action that's going to do that. There are lots of different measures of what that success can be. And if you're in a job function where the success is defined in a way that you don't find inherently valuable, or where there's a disconnect between how you're valuing success and how the job is, or your supervisors or whoever, or the marketplace, then I don't think you'll ever be happy, right? I mean, I think you have to find something where success for the company or success in the job function also registers to you as success, so that, and that has to be clearly defined. As we move forward and as we try to achieve success, there are two kind of breakdowns in that, or two things that can go wrong there. And one is if I don't have a good map of what that success is going to look like, if I can't predict it with any clarity, then I can't move towards it. And then that creates anxiety. And you see that with my students all the time. And that's why I give models so much and samples of what the end product is. This is what a good essay is, or this is what I'm asking you to do. And let's walk through this. But if you just have some loose or muddy definition of what success is going to be, and you have no kind of endpoint that's clearly defined of what that, then how do you move towards it?
But you do have an endpoint as an educator because you have grades. So like clearly based on, your perception of my work as a student, like you're going to grade it. In business, I guess maybe we can say, the KPIs, the metrics, the revenue, those are success drivers or those success indicators. But yeah, I think that's kind of where it gets hard. And I think that I remember in my last company, a really bright gentleman kept throwing out this idea that, hey, if our employees don't know the score, how are they going to win the game? I think that's just kind of another way of saying what we're saying.
There are grades, obviously, in this environment, but there's a lot of chatter there because, again, remember, I'm teaching the class, and then the kids are learning and they're turning the work into me, and particularly in English, where you have an essay, which is subjective. I get to dictate the grades. So one thing that I could do if I wanted to is just give everybody A's and then be like, look, they all exceeded expectations. The entire class got an A. It is a weird thing that once you're the producer of the A, I'm the person that generates that. And again, a grade is really not for me. A grade is feedback to the student that gives them some sense of how they're doing. It's feedback to the parent. It's not great. It's a terrible tool for that kind of thing, because obviously, as we all know, there's lots of different ways to get to a B plus, and that can be a really strong student not working at all, or that can be a weak student working really hard. And I think it's the same thing sometimes with the environmental factors and profits, where sometimes the profits are going up even though the company is making terrible decisions, and sometimes the profits are going down and the company might be making strong choices. So you have to have some other marker of success that is under your control, I think, other than just those, because there's too many variables. And then again, you have to be thinking that you're making choices that are going to make sense to you and that are going to produce positive results for you. And you have to know.
Yeah, but think about like a public stock where, depending, our revenue could be up, our earnings could be up, our turnover could be down, like everything could be positive, positive, positive. But the market doesn't like it. And so the market is going to take it out on the stock price. Does that mean that we're not performing? Or, it's like there's got to be some kind of inherent sense of value that is disconnected from the external look at that, at how I'm valued. And it's hard. I mean, I think that a lot of businessmen, once they leave business and they want to retire, businessmen, businesswomen, I think they haven't learned that lesson. And the value, they don't value themselves as much. And they have a really hard time making that transition to retirement or to the next chapter in their life, because they're not getting all of those like accolades and all those things that they base their success on. So I think if you could figure that out early in your career as a business person, as a teacher, as whatever, as a person, and disconnect yourself from these things, but then again, you've got the situation where I'm sure you've had it. The student that comes in is like, I don't care about the grades. I'm just going to do what I do, and like if I get good grades, great. If I don't get good grades, I don't care.
Yeah, and that can be good or bad,
right?
Because sometimes it's great because a focus on grades, as you say, same thing with the focus on price. Because the other problem with the grade or the stock price or whatever it is once the grade drops, once the quarter ends, or once then you're on to the next one, right? It's not lasting, because now you need the next day and you need the next day. Or once you hit a certain market evaluation, now you need to go up and you need to go up. And so the goalposts keep moving and they're never going to stop, right? It's always. And so if you're just predicating your happiness or your, the value of your job in that kind of external marker, then you're kind of dedicating yourself to just chasing something that's always going to be receding in the distance. So there has to be something else. And obviously, if you completely sever, sometimes I have some students who care a little bit about grades, care a little bit about what I'm trying to teach you to do, so that you can actually improve, because these things do have value outside of this place, right? Colleges are keen on those things, those kinds of things. And so, you can't be completely severed from the external, but there has to be something else.
Yeah, I think in business, you have to remember the why. And you have to have a strong why. Why am I doing this? And it's not, look, maybe it's to feed my family. That's a noble pursuit. But, as a business owner, like at INFAWORK, we want to make business easier for people. Like I want people to be able to start companies and run companies and grow companies and have, this great tool that's with them every step of the way. Like if I can do that, that's success. If, we create a company that's worth, billions of dollars, that's great. It's great for me, great for, all of our employees. But the why is not that. The why is, our mission of, helping people create businesses. So I think it's just making sure we're connected to the why. But let's move on, because we've got a ton of questions and we're halfway through, and I want to get your thoughts on a lot of these different things. And the next thing is about mentors and growing up and kind of your leadership mentors. But I do want to say, in thinking about it, I didn't even think about this before you came on. Like I'm thinking about two people who are probably two of my biggest mentors in my life. One passed away, Dr. Stephen Porter, who was my teacher starting in ninth grade and all the way through high school. And we ended up, writing a script together. It's just an amazing guy. And then Howard Fisher, my biology teacher in 10th grade, who I go and, still have Starbucks with them when I go back to my hometown. So, I mean, these are just people that had such a huge impact in my life. And I think that as a teacher, you're so right, like you said before, to make an impact. And then, maybe it's not 2 or 3 years later. In my case, here we are 25 years later, and I'm still talking and thinking about 30 years later, still talking and thinking about these guys. So back to you, mentors. Who were your mentors growing up? Or maybe just one that you can think about that sort of helped you see what you do now as a possible path?
Well, I mean, I think obviously all teachers have those teachers that were really important to them that they can name. I had Professor Savage at William and Mary, who was an English teacher. He taught Milton, so I took a Paradise Lost class from him,
Oh, wow.
and he was one of those guys that just didn't need notes. I mean, just incredibly intelligent, just a huge forehead with a big brain inside of it. And, I was blown away by his felicity with the text and the ways in which he just seemed to know everything. And whenever, he would just come in and have a conversation. And anytime anyone brought up anything where they'd be like, oh, I thought that was an interesting thing with the rat. And he'd be like, oh, you mean, page 42, line 7 or something like that. And yet, he would always very easy to laugh. And he did it without an ego. So what was really inspiring to me, I think, was that he was both the smartest guy in the room and then also the humblest guy in the room, more than happy to lose an argument to just like a little freshman like me or something like that. And so it wasn't a winning and losing piece to him so much as just an exploration together. And he had, that true confidence, not arrogance, but just the confidence in his own abilities that he was in some ways unthreatenable. He just didn't, he wore his knowledge really easily. And I also think about, I was watching piece on, and I forget what it's called. I think it's called Playing Shakespeare. It was a BBC show. And Patrick Stewart and David Suchet were there, and they were talking about playing Shylock and Merchant of Venice at different times. And here are the two guys who could easily be rivals, right? Operating at the same time, doing Royal Shakespeare Company stuff, both actors who are kind of in that same, obviously different body types, but very similar in that regard. And they were just so excited to talk about the different ways they approach the character, so excited to see how the other person had unlocked their character and what they'd done with it. And they had played two very different Shylocks, but just the excitement to just hear what the other person had done, I always remember that as just being like, okay, that's not only leadership, but then that's also confidence. Is the confidence to not feel threatened.
Like your light doesn't dim my light.
Right. And I just can't wait to see it. Right. I'm just so excited to be just playing with somebody else who cares about the same things I care about.
How about, and we talked about this the last time we saw each other, and it really kind of got me thinking that, maybe we'll get to that. But the questions about risk and how has risk played a role in your life and your choices?
Well, I guess, one of the ways that I can say risk plays a role is I'm an independent school teacher, so I don't have a curriculum built for me. I don't, it's one of the reasons why I am an independent school teacher is because I like to build my own classes. So I don't have the responsibility the public school teacher has to all the materials, and they have to teach to a certain curriculum. So what that means, though, is that I have to design the class myself, and I have to think about what does the department need, and then what do the kids want, and then build something. And so, I did a class a couple years back now that was a class about horror, sci-fi, and video gaming, and where the students were studying some sci-fi text and some horror text, and then looking at relationships between, emotion and intelligence, and then looking at, reader viewer kind of relationships and author. And at the end of it, they had to produce a video game.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know anything about coding at the time. And certainly no class like this had been offered in an English department that I was aware of, at least in St. Louis. I mean, that's a weird class. Yeah. The easiest thing for me to do is to teach a Shakespeare class and then have essays in class and out of class as the primary grading tool. And then just take points off for grammar or something like that, because nobody pushes back against that. Everybody understands that Shakespeare is important. Everybody understands that in class close readings and then out of class essays are my responsibility. And everybody realizes that if you mess up a comma, then you're supposed to lose a point. So that's a really easy sell, and nobody's going to push back against anything like that. Now, if I'm instead saying, all right, I'm going to teach a semester-long course that culminates in the coding of a video game, and I'm going to be able to assess that thing and take a look at the intentions and the narrative within that video game in order to see whether or not these students learn something about the relationship between the author, the text, and the viewer, and then drop a grade on that has a percentage next to it, 87. What's the difference between 87 or 92 and something like that? I have to be really clear on defining that. And I'm opening myself up to attack in that way too, because that's the kind of thing that a parent will struggle to understand. That was not a class that was ever offered to them in high school. They have no conception about what's going on there and how that's functioning. So I have to do a lot more groundwork in terms of selling that course, selling the value of the course, making sure that the students know what they're doing and why they're doing it so that they can go home and talk to their parents about it in ways that everybody values. And so I think that's probably the biggest exposure I have around risk is when I do things like that I think are important to the students. Obviously, AI is a big deal right now, and how I incorporate that into my classroom. There's no real roadmap for that. It's really hard to predict. People are going to be using AI and what skills I need to give my students in terms of how to use that tool to be successful in business. But that I have to jump in, right? I have a responsibility to the students in order to, if there's a new tool, if the world has changed, then I have a responsibility to teach them how to use that tool so that they're set up for success later in life, or at least in college.
Content risk, really. That's content risk so that not only can continue to be relevant, but engaging and kind of meeting the students halfway to where they are, but keeping it interesting, but also connecting it to the point you're trying to get across. I mean, that's what the best teachers do, right? When I think about the teachers that have stayed with me, it's not the teachers that have gone and just sort of followed things by the book and taught the same thing over and over again. It's the teachers that, like you, took that risk, went out on a ledge, did something different, creative, and man, I give you a lot of credit for that.
Thank you. Thank you. But that is something where then you have to make the learning discernible. There has to be some, people have to understand the value in what you're doing. And it's really hard sometimes in a class where maybe you don't, it's hard to see what's going on in that particular class and how that's connecting to everything else. You have to do a little bit more legwork.
Maybe one hack or one practice that you've adopted or learned, and love to hear the genesis of it, that allows you to kind of be as efficient as you have to be with all the different things that you have going on.
One thing that being a teacher is I spend a lot of time designing rubrics for the assessment. So you have the grid, 1 to 4, with 4 being exceeds expectations, B is meets, C is approaching expectations, and then 1 is deficient. And then you have the different skills, and then you fill in that grid. And obviously, I'm not just pulling things out of the ether. You're taking a look at Common Core standards or whatever else, whatever you're pulling in order to create that thing. But anyway, so when I assign something to a student and I give them a handout and I say, this is what I want you to do, and then I also give them the rubric, and they'll usually be 4 or 5 skills on that, because you can't give 30 skills. That's just too much to focus on. And then I'm sure you remember there was, some time in middle school or something like that, either you did it or a friend did it, where you had to make a poster, and it was for science, and some kid came in and they had a beautiful poster. They spent hours with puffy paint and made it look, but it didn't hit the requirements of the actual assignment. And so it got a low grade. It maybe even got an incomplete, like a 50. So this is all to say, I'm always thinking about what's actually on the rubric. And I don't just mean about that when it comes time for me to roll out to my students, but then when I'm asked to do something, either by my department chair or by the head of school or whatever else, the question is, what's on that rubric? What is that? How will my success be defined? What does that look like? What are the skills that are actually going to be the things that matter? Right, that have been articulated by that person, so that then I can marshal my energies in the ways that make sense, and I don't spend hours and hours using puffy paint when, okay, that's nice, but that's not on the rubric.
So let me kind of just dissect it a little bit. So yeah. Trying to apply that to the business world. So are you just saying that you have an instinctual ability or learned ability to be able to look at a task, a project, extract what the most the biggest return on investment areas are, and be able to focus your time and attention towards those things, because those are the things that are most important. So it's really a prioritization that you're good at.
Part of that just comes from, I've been teaching here for 17 years now. So 17 years of making mistakes, I now have a much better sense of what this particular organization cares about and what it doesn't, right? I think that's all just, again, the first couple of years, those years 3 to 5 at any new place, you're still finding your feet and you're still trying to figure out what is this organism that I'm a part of? How does it feed and what does it produce? So yeah, hopefully I've gotten better at assessing those things more quickly, and I have a better sense now of what questions to ask and how about going to get the information that I need. But I know very much that it's been a focus of my professional career for a long time, of just thinking in terms of what's necessary and what's nice. What are the things that are actually going to be graded, and then what are the things that make it look pretty, but that nobody really cares about. And that doesn't mean I don't do the pretty things sometimes, or I don't make it look good as well.
Right. I like what you said. I think that it's amazing to me thinking about what you said is about asking questions. What questions to ask. You kind of dive in with you get a sense, but you're asking these questions to kind of confirm, like, are these the things you're looking for? And it's surprising, even in the business world and with people that I have working for me. I think that I don't get those questions enough. I'm not the best communicator. And sometimes I kind of just sort of state my vision, and I need those questions back at me so that I can help think through these things. Like when we're developing INFAWORK, the technology, and we're trying to work on a feature, and I'll say I wanted to do this, this, and this. And then they start programming and it comes back, and inevitably there's issues. And yes, I did not communicate clearly what I wanted, but at the same time, I need help. Like I don't see it all clearly. I just sort of see the end point. And those questions help me define like more and more. Okay, I didn't think about that. Let's think, and just sort of the idea is collaborative and it comes together. So I think a lot of people don't ask those questions because I don't know, they're scared or they don't have the courage to, but it's just so important.
I mean, and I think part of it is are you willing to put in that initial small effort in order to get out ahead of things? Because a lot of times, you have a lot going on and you're just waiting for clarity. But there are things that you can do to find that clarity. And a lot of it's just going and building the thing. And I think part of it is also that being scared of being told that you're wrong, or bringing the thing to your supervisor and being like, this is what I'm thinking you're saying. Is this right? And then they're going to be like, no, you're an idiot or something like that. And maybe there are supervisors and bosses that do that. But I find that, why would anybody, if the thing's not due for 2 weeks and you come to them on day one of that process and be like, I already mocked this up just to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Even if you're wrong, that's still great feedback. Then you're like, all right, I'm not going to devote all my time. Why would anybody have a problem with you going off and spending your time in order to do that, in order to get a clearer sense of what's right and what's wrong? And then also it's that, it's the same thing with the students will ask, is this going to be on the test? And obviously I don't give tests, but they've been asking that for generations and they'll continue to ask that. And I always tell them, you don't need to ask that question. If the teacher mentions it once in one class, it's not going to be on the test unless they're a terrible teacher. But if they bring it up 3 times across 3 separate classes, that's going to be on the test. People devote time to the things that they care about. They devote bandwidth to that. And then it's the same thing on the assessment on the back end. If you've got some supervisor that's giving you some performance report, right, that is incredibly valuable information, not just how you scored on it, but what are the categories? Like, what are the things? What's number 1? What's number 2? How is it ordered? What are the things that are on that sheet? Because they're telling you these are the things that I care about. These are the things that are going to directly impact my assessment of your performance.
But as a supervisor,
it's a good question to ask.
You have to be so careful. I mean, let's compare this to a restaurant. If you have a restaurant, you have to be 100%. If you have one bad meal, then that person, that couple, they're not going to come back and they're going to tell their friends they had a bad meal. It's the same thing as a supervisor. I mean, if that one person comes to you on day one of a 2-week project and you snap at them or you kind of give them some gruff because they're asking a question, oh, isn't it obvious? Or, you're taking your crap out on them. You're telling that person, don't come to me, don't ask questions. And then they're going to proceed to do that because that's the kind of supervisor that you've presented yourself to be. So you have to be so patient and so willing to create a culture where
Yeah.
those people can ask you those questions. And I've made that mistake so many times in my career, something I still have to battle with because, I get impatient or I've got 1,000 things going on. And sometimes, frankly, it is an obvious question, but it's obvious to me. And I just have to be more empathetic when I'm answering that and look at those people asking those questions as they're doing the right thing. And I can't forget that.
Although, there are good questions and bad questions, obviously. And part of it,
I thought there were no
you
bad
can definitely,
questions.
no, that's not true at all.
Not
They're
true.
terrible questions. Yeah, so for instance, as a leader, you can teach your whoever how to ask questions. And I certainly work with my students on that. So, when they're thinking about a thesis, for instance, and they're working on their essay, which again is a complex piece. There's a lot of moving parts, but the thing that takes the most time is when they come to office hours and they're just like, I don't understand, and that doesn't help me. I don't have anything to work with there. Now it's going to be another 10 or 15 minutes before you even get to the root problem. And part of what I say now these days is I don't let them come in with just that. And what I tell them is I got to see you swing the bat so that I know what's right and wrong with your stroke. So if you come in and you say I don't know what you're asking for, I don't understand, then I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to continue that conversation. But if you come in with something, and I think it's twofold. One is if you come in and you say, all right, this is what I think you want, then it gives the other person an opportunity to very quickly and effectively be like, yes, yes, no. And it also, though, it shows that you respect and value their time, that you took the time to try to do the thing yourself. And I think with teachers, certainly, the questions that are really frustrating are the ones that the students don't value your time, where it's just like, you can Google that.
Right.
You don't need me to find out what the MLA citation structure is. Like it's MLA, you know what the addition is, you put that into Google and there's 80 million sites that will tell you what that works cited page is supposed to look like.
It's the same.
You don't need me for that.
Yeah, it's the same in business. I think that I had a third-party developer that I created a scope for a new AI functionality we're working on, and I sent it to them, and it was several slides. And I said, can I let's have a session where schedule some time for you to ask me questions, or it'd be great to get them ahead of time. And he sent me a question like, "Can you explain it further?" And it's just like, well, explain what further? Like, I just sent you the whole thing. Do you have specific questions? But I mean, I guess then you just don't work with that person. But I agree. I know exactly what you're saying. Like, you haven't put in the initial effort that shows me that,
Right.
you're not wasting my time.
That you understand I'm not your only resource, and that I'm a hired gun, right? I'm not, I'm here for a very specific reason. So, and I think it just sets the tone for the meeting too. When a student comes in and they've got like a notepad that's got, and I can see they've got writing on it, they've got 3 or 4 questions that they've already got, and they're banging down a list, then I know, all right, they're here, they're trying to use this time effectively, and then I'm all in. And what wouldn't I do for that student? But if they're just there and I get the sense that they don't even want to be there, or their parent forced them to be there or something like that,
Right.
and they did nothing to prepare, and their whole goal is, I'm not going to work outside of class, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to see how much work of my work this man will do for me, then at that point, that's a completely different dynamic. And that shifts what my goals in that particular meeting are, because now it's not a question of how do I help them write a better essay. Now it's a question of how do I help them use their teachers more successfully.
And this is so important, not just for what you're doing, but the skill that they have to develop and translate into the work world, because that is, now it's kind of time and money. And I feel, you're giving me hope that, this generation of our next generation is going to come up and be able to execute at a higher level, because I do feel like, and I don't want to kind of paint on one generation bad, but I feel like the overall level of execution is declining, and it's more of the, can you explain this more, or can you tell me what this citation is, rather than kind of doing the legwork and getting 50% of the way there and then having me help you get to the rest of the way. But look, we're running out of time, so I want to ask you 2 more quick questions, maybe one quick one and one a little longer one. The first one, thinking about the job of a teacher, all those things, all those roles you play, but then also the take-home work and the grading, and what is a practice that you've brought into your life that helps you kind of delineate between work and life, that balance?
I guess there's 2 things that I'll say about how I balance work and life. One is a very important thing happened to me when I was my first year teaching, when my grandfather died. At the same time that I was moving out of the house that I was in to a different house. So over the span of 2 weekends, I had to go up to Connecticut for a funeral. And then I also had to move while I was also doing all of this teaching. And when that happens, when you have extreme pressure around your time, you figure out very, very quickly what is necessary and vital to the task and what is not. And so that allowed me to really get a good sense of what do I need to do in order to teach at the level that I consider to be acceptable, and then what would be nice to do in order to get above that and to really have some banger classes. So I think those pressure points, those times when your life just converges and you've got 19 things going on, they're really illuminating and elucidating in some ways. And I was lucky enough to have one early to where I could start thinking about, all right, what's necessary and what's not, and get rid of some of the bells and whistles in order to manage that more successfully. And then the other piece is on the other end. The grading is probably the biggest time component, particularly for me as an 11th and 12th grade English teacher. My kids are turning in 12, 13, 14, 15-page essays. So when I was first started teaching, I was giving my students 15 different things to focus on. And then the end result of that is that they picked the one that whichever one they liked or whichever one they understood best, and then they addressed it. And I realized that less is more in that case, that you cannot give somebody that kind of a choice because they can't focus on 15 things to fix. So what they'll do is they'll pick one or two, and what you're really doing is giving them a menu, and maybe they're going to pick the two wrong ones. Maybe they'll pick the two that are just throwaway comments where you just make this change here, but that's really not as important as some comment down at the bottom. So I've really streamlined that now and really put a focus on, when it comes to the things that I do for my messaging back to the students, is it actionable, right? Am I giving them feedback that's actionable, and how am I helping them to identify the actions that are necessary for their success in the future? So that's made my feedback shorter and tighter and more condensed and more, again, moving from broadsword to scalpel, where all right, I'm noticing that you're doing 10 things wrong, but I'm not going to tell you about 7 of them. We'll deal with those other 7 once you fix these 3 that I want you to fix. And then we'll hit the other 7. And I think part of it is that long view of, we don't need to fix everything on this essay. You don't need to be great right now. You need to be better than everybody else when you leave my room so that you have a chance at having greater success in the next teacher's classroom. So I have all year. And I think sometimes, early in my career, I was trying to fix everything with these students writing right in week 1. And that's not using the time that's being given to me.
That's a great point about just personnel development too. It's just, understanding that, you're making a commitment for this person's career, at least as long as they choose to be with your company. And, you can fix things over time. It doesn't have to be everything. All feedback, you're right. It's like, what was the famous phrase? Like, if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any. And it's the same thing. You're right. People are only capable of a couple things. Last question here. We got to wrap this up. And I want to kind of, as you kind of think about this next sort of stage of your life, when you look out, what is most exciting or what is most daunting to you?
It's the same thing, and it's the obvious answer. It's AI, right? How is AI going to be used? How is it going to change the world? And what is that tool useful for, right? And obviously, I think people immediately think about students as using it in order to write their essays, or using it in malevolent ways, or ways that don't align with educational practices. But yeah, it's changing. I mean, and the world needs to change, right? You look around at the world; it's not perfect. This is the next evolution. This is going to be something that's going to change the ways in which everything functions. And as with the internet before it, or whatever else, or the smartphone, or fire, it's whoever can use that thing effectively. And you have that, obviously there's a lot of aphorisms around this. When all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, all that kind of stuff, right? And all of it is about the fact that as human beings, we're tool using animals. And this is now, again, AI is not an obstacle to overcome. It is a constraint of the system. The genie's out of the bottle. It's here. It's going to be used. Successful people are going to use it successfully. Unsuccessful people are either not going to use it at all, or they're going to use it unsuccessfully. So when I'm thinking about, again, my what my job is, what my function is. It's to give the students the skills that they need in order to be able to compete and succeed later in life. And AI is that thing. And I'm not an AI native, right? It just showed up. I've got to figure out how to use it. I've got to think about how I would use it. And now I've got to think about how students are going to use it 10, 15 years into the future. And there's no real roadmap for that. That's really anxiety creating for teachers, just because, again, there's no way to predict that. But at the same time, it is really exciting in order to think about the ways in which this could really eliminate some drudgery, because there's nothing that says that the 10 to 12 page analytical essay is the best way for students to grow their skills and abilities in humanities. When I think about what English is and what English is teaching, it's universal in a sense of I'm reading something, I'm consuming some product, whether it's a book or whether it's a business report, and then I've got to find the patterns within it. What you're doing is pattern creation, and what you're trying to do, or the skill that's really significant and important to that, I think more and more. And I don't think I'm in synergy with a lot of teachers on this one, but when it comes to that question of do we want effective consumption or effective creation, right? Curation is the thing that I think matters the most. You have all this data coming in, you have all of these different tools. How are you figuring out what is important, and how are you putting that and synthesizing that into some sort of digestible package to where you have an archive or repository of your thoughts and what's happening and what the market trends are, or whatever the case may be.
Tex, my wife is a former Navy doctor, and when people find out, they always say thank you for your service. But I don't know if you hear that a lot, and I don't know if a lot of teachers hear that. But thank you for everything you do, and your peers. My daughter went to your school; she's friends with your daughter, and up until you said the 15-page papers at 11th grade, I was like, God, I wish I had this guy as a teacher. And I'm sure a lot of your students think that. But thanks for joining me. Thanks for sharing these thoughts. And, let's do a happy hour together soon, just like this.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
All right, buddy. Take care.